Julie Menin is the first Jewish speaker of the city council, and in her first 100 days has presided over an activist body that has introduced a record 1,200 bills. So I have to ask you this question. You know, a lot of people look on the speaker as the check and balance on the mayor. How do you see the job?
Well, we're a co-equal branch of government, and we have a number of different functions. Obviously, we pass legislation. We also have oversight over all the city agencies. We have a proactive land use role. I really view our role, Marcia, as all of the above. I've been commissioner of 3 different city agencies, so I understand that oversight role. Oversight is very beneficial overall because it makes sure that the agencies are performing at the highest level possible. There'll be areas of broad agreement with the mayor, and there are around the affordability agenda. We completely agree we need to build more affordable housing. We need to do universal childcare, which is something the city council has been working on for many years. And in fact, we just passed some bills to make it easier to build more childcare facilities. And then, of course, there will be, as is natural, areas of disagreement. But when there are those areas of disagreement, we want to make sure that we're doing so in a productive way that really works for New Yorkers.
Well, people notice the fact that there's definitely a philosophical difference between you and the mayor, who says he's going to govern as a democratic socialist, and it comes out in his desire to tax the rich. Now, the governor is going to allow a pied-à-terre tax, which is a way of taxing the rich who don't live in New York City. But I guess the question you have to ask is, if we start taxing the rich who live here in New York City, are we worried that these people will leave?
Well, I support progressive taxation, to be clear. I do hope that eventually the federal government will actually do more progressive taxation so they're not pitting states against each other, because right now we have a situation where we lost 20,000 jobs last year, and in the 4 prior years we gained 190,000 jobs. Many of those jobs have gone to the states of Texas and Florida. We also lost 5,000 small businesses last year, so more small businesses actually closed and opened. And as a former small business owner, that is very, very concerning. I support the pied-à-terre tax that the governor has come out with. I do believe in progressive taxation, but we want to be smart about it when we do it. And so one of the things that the council has done is we put forward a series of savings plans where we've identified billions of dollars of savings without making cuts, because to be clear, we do not want to make cuts to services. We believe it's really possible to be able to do these savings without doing any cuts.
See, the reason I asked the question is because if you take a look at the city's tax base, people who earn $1 million make up 1% of the population, but they pay between 37 and 40% of the taxes. So the question is it a legitimate argument to make that there's a concern that these people who have more flexible income would leave New York City?
Well, we've certainly seen job loss, as I mentioned, to Texas and Florida. It used to be 20 years ago that there were triple the number of financial services jobs in New York than there were in the state of Texas. Now the state of Texas has surpassed us. So we do want to make sure that we are constantly keeping businesses here and attracting new businesses, because by a robust economy will, of course, allow us to build more parks, to support our schools, to build more affordable housing, all of the things we need to do in the affordability crisis. One of the things that I've done as speaker is we've created a new division in the city council focused on economic development, precisely to be able to work with businesses. We're also doing a number of pieces of legislation to help small businesses. As a former small business owner, I know how hard it is to own and operate a small business in the city. So we're doing legislation to reduce fines on small businesses and really cut down on bureaucratic red tape that make it so difficult to own a business in New York City. I used to serve as commissioner of the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. And in that role, Marcia, one of the things I did is I instituted 25 reforms to reduce fines so that we'd give small businesses 30 days to cure the violation, as long as it wasn't a safety violation, of course, before ever receiving a fine. So those are the kinds of policies I think we need to do more of to support our small business sector, which are really the backbone of New York City.
So here's the question. Why does the pied-à-terre tax, which does tax the ultra-rich. Why does that make sense?
Well, I think it makes sense because we do have a budget deficit, and so we do need to do something about that. And that is a revenue raiser that would really affect those who aren't living in New York City. It's on homes in excess of $5 million. So I think that that does make sense. So now, over the course of the next couple months, we'll be having budget hearings at the City Council, really working with the administration to try to identify additional savings, which we'll need to find in order to reach our final negotiation at the end of June.
So the reason I was asking about the pied-à-terre tax, because it generated a social media post by the president attacking the mayor because he says it's going to ruin the city because of tax. Now, one could argue that he's worried about it because he himself might have to pay the pied-à-terre tax because he's not a resident of New York City, and he does have a multi-million-dollar home in Trump Tower. Do you think it would be right for the president of the United States to be paying this same pied-à-terre tax because he fits the description of what it would cover?
Well, certainly anyone. Of course, the president has to pay. Everyone has to pay that who qualifies in that. It's about 13,000 homes that will be affected by the pied-à-terre tax. Again, it's for people who have this second home. They're not living in New York City, but they've purchased a home in excess of $5 million. So I do think that it makes sense, and so that is why I came out in support of it.
Do you think that the president was upset about the tax because he knows he's personally going to have to pay it?
I don't know. I couldn't put I don't know about that. But I think, look, at the end of the day, what we need to focus on is we have to do a responsible budget that really helps New Yorkers. One of the things that we have focused on is restoring cuts to libraries. We restored cuts to cultural institutions. I think that's very important because libraries and cultural institutions are so important to the vibrancy of our great city. And so many tourists come to our city because of our vibrant cultural scene.
You know, there are many people in the financial sector who look at the city budget who think that the city council has been the adult in the room in terms of the budget proposal that you made, which they seem to be more realistic, not tapping into rainy day funds and things like that. But the governor says that both you and the mayor have to look at cuts that you have to make in order to balance the budget, that there isn't an endless supply of money. So in looking at that, where is there room to make cuts?
Well, first of all, I think the proposals that we put forward, Marcia, are very smart, sensible proposals. So, for example, the Department of Education, which we spend more money on than any other city agency, almost $40 billion of the $127 billion goes to the Department of Education. Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting any cuts to the schools. What I'm suggesting is $12 billion of the $40 billion are for consulting contracts.
$12 billion out of 40?
Yes, and when we had our oversight hearing on this issue, I asked the Department of Education if they had done any audit of those consulting contracts, and they unequivocally said no. So I think that's a real opportunity for savings. We know that many of these outside consulting contracts, there's really a duplication of work, and so I think that's an area that we can absolutely save money on, and that is one of the many areas that we propose for savings. There are many others as well. So I look forward to the conversation with the administration. We are going to be doing our hearings, and that will be another way that we can get more into the issues.
So I have to ask you about another thing, Local Law 95, which requires a lot of, 97, that requires buildings to electrify in some or substance. The question really is this: should this be amended? Because a lot of co-ops and condos are older buildings, and the cost of electrifying in these buildings could be many millions of dollars. And some buildings may decide to just pay the fine for noncompliance, as opposed to actually having the wherewithal to do this massive overhaul. Is there any way, any wiggle room that this should be amended?
Well, there's an accelerator program as part of the law to really help buildings to comply. One of my colleagues, Councilmember Lee, does have a bill to try to amend the law. I have not had those conversations yet with Councilmember Lee or other colleagues in terms of where they're at on that. I think the important thing is that we work with buildings on the compliance. So that accelerator program is one way to help buildings to comply with it.
I guess the question then becomes, I mean, because we have such an older housing stock, if it makes sense to say times have changed, you know, some of the climate change laws may be too expensive and maybe we need to take a second look. Do you think that's possible?
I mean, look, we can always look at laws to see if compliance is an issue. I think in this case, though, because we have the accelerator program, I'm hoping that the administration will work with building owners to focus on the compliance. There are also some institutions that needed exemptions, hospitals and others that were having difficulty complying. So that was another issue that it had been addressed. But I mean, look, we're always open to feedback on the law. This was a law that was passed by the council before we got there. We're always open to feedback. And I know Councilmember Lee does have this law. I think really what we need to do is really be talking to stakeholders, talking to the administration, and seeing how we can get this more robust accelerator program up and running.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it right there for now. Up next, an ultra-rich guy who says, tax me more. We are back with Council Speaker Julie Menin. You know, one of the first things that you did as Council Speaker was to introduce anti-hate, anti-Semitism legislation that was passed by the City Council but has not yet been signed by the mayor. Why is this legislation so important, especially establishing a perimeter so that protesters can't attack houses of worship?
Well, Marcia, it's so important because we've seen such a rise in anti-Semitism in our city. Right now, anti-Semitic hate crimes are approximately 53% of all hate crimes, yet the Jewish population is between 10 and 11% of New York City's population. So I introduced this package of bills to combat anti-Semitism and all types of hate in January, and we just passed that package of bills, and they create a safe access around all houses of worship, because I strongly believe that congregants should be able to enter and exit their house of worship without the threat of fear, intimidation, or injury. So the bill basically requires the NYPD to create a safe perimeter if there is intimidation or harassment. And so I think that is a very common sense proposal and one that we should all agree on.
Yet the mayor has expressed reservations because he's concerned about First Amendment rights of people to protest.
Sure.
And I mean, even the governor in this past week proposed a bill that would set up a 25-foot perimeter around houses of worship and schools and education facilities. Do you think that it's possible to do that and still preserve the right to protest?
Absolutely. I think our bills achieve that perfect balance. The right to peacefully protest is sacrosanct, and we don't want to do anything to infringe on it, and our bills do not. On the contrary, what our bills do is they bring more transparency to this, and they assure that the NYPD will create that perimeter around houses of worship so that congregants can safely enter and exit them. So, for example, what happened at Park East Synagogue doesn't happen again. And so I think that is just a practical approach. But certainly protesters absolutely have the right to peacefully protest in front of a house of worship, in front of a school, and nothing in the bills in any way change that.
So the mayor said this past week that he was trying to negotiate changes to those bills. I wonder if there's wiggle room any way you can change the bill to make him support it.
I've had a number of conversations with the mayor on the bills. It's not clear yet if he'll do a veto or not. We also worked very much with the law department on the bills, and I do believe very strongly that our package of bills achieve that balance. And look, we need to do much more to combat anti-Semitism in the city. The other thing that we're doing as a council is about 2 years ago, I created a program at the Museum of Jewish Heritage to bring every public school 8th grade student to the permanent Holocaust exhibition. I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. Both my mother and grandmother survived the Holocaust. My grandfather and other family members did not. And right now, studies are showing that 34% of young people in the city, Marcia, believe the Holocaust is a myth or is exaggerated. 34%. It's truly shocking. And so to me, the best antidote to fighting hate is education. And so certainly bringing young people to the Holocaust exhibition is a way to be able to learn about that history and hopefully to build bridges and to try to reduce the hate that is existing in our city.
So I want to talk to you about the mayor's proposal to have free buses. There's been a lot of talk about it because when you talk to the MTA, they say, well, it's not fair for everybody to get a free bus because there are people who can afford to pay for free buses. So my question to you is this: what about, instead of free buses, if you had employers pay their workers the bus or subway fare to get to their job, because they're the ones that say that it's so high, and then everybody else just pays to ride the bus?
Well, it's an interesting idea, and we actually launched something like that when I was Commissioner of Consumer Affairs. We launched a commuter benefits program where employers could do just what you're saying. Now what the City Council is doing is we are basically proposing an expansion of fares to truly make the bus free for those in need, those at 150% of the poverty line or below, because those are the New Yorkers most in need. And so we want to make sure that the bus and subway is free for them. So that's actually part of our budget proposal.
I just thought that if employers paid the people who are actually creating wealth for them by going to their jobs, that might be a more palatable solution for the governor and for the MTA, who so far have been less than enthusiastic about a free bus program.
Yeah, we need to look at all options. We're very excited about fares and our fares expansion. I think it has broad-based support because then we're providing free subway and bus fare for those that are most in need. And I think that is really where the focus can be.
So you have had a lot of service in New York City. As you've said, you've run 3 different agencies. I wonder, what made you run for the City Council?
Well, I was running the census, and I served as the city's census director in 2020, which was a Herculean task because while we were doing the census, COVID obviously hit New York City, and we, as we all know, were the epicenter of COVID. I'm very proud of the work we did on the census. We finished #1 of all cities. And when that work concluded, I had a number of people in the community who encouraged me to run for the City Council seat. I had never been an elected official before. I'd served as a commissioner for a long time. I was a former small business owner, a lawyer for over 20 years. But I'd never been in public office. And so I thought, I really do want to be part of trying to solve some of the issues that face our city. So I ran for City Council in 2021. It's an honor to be in the City Council, to work alongside my colleagues, and it's a tremendous honor to serve now as Speaker for the next 4 years.
What's the best part of the job?
Working with my colleagues. I have tremendous colleagues, and so I really enjoy that. And I love the ability to be able to get things done, whether it's through legislation, whether it's through oversight, the budget, land use. We have a whole proactive land use program that we are initiating where we want to build on top of some of the 215 public library branches to build more affordable housing. Because generally the council has been a reactive body on land use. I want us to be more proactive. So I'm very excited about that. And so being Speaker, there's so many different tools in our toolbox that we can utilize to try to improve the lives of New Yorkers.
But yet, with getting off to such a fast start with the 1,200 bills, et cetera, obviously you want to make a mark on it. Is that going to make it more easier to get along with the mayor, less easy to get along with the mayor? Because you clearly have, you and the council members clearly have an agenda that may not always be his agenda.
Well, I think with any mayor and any speaker, there are always going to be areas of agreement and disagreement. We have tremendous agreement on the affordability agenda. That has been something certainly that I've worked on for years. I've worked on healthcare, medical debt, lowering skyrocketing healthcare costs, universal child care. We need to build more affordable housing. And then it's natural that there are going to be areas of disagreement. And so that is part of the job. But when we do disagree, we want to do so in a productive way, not an unproductive way, in a way that really focuses on the substance of the issue and hopefully trying to reach some consensus. And it's my job as Speaker to get consensus among the City Council members.
So the reason I'm asking the question is because, let's face it, you and the mayor's view of the budget is divergent at the present time. And some people would say it's really important to deal with the affordability issue, but at what point does government not have any more money to do that? So the question then becomes, what can government rightfully spend money on, and at what point do you say we just don't have any more, we have to balance the budget?
Yeah, well, I think we can do all of the above. In other words, if we're smart about it, we can grow the city's economy, make sure that we're attracting new businesses here and keeping businesses here, which obviously grows jobs, which is something we absolutely have to do. We want to make sure that city services are not cut, because I don't believe we need to cut city services at all to balance this budget. I believe we can make responsible savings. I think there are waste and inefficiencies within the budget, and that is really what we outlined in our budget proposal. We identified have billions of dollars of savings that don't cut services at all. So I look forward to the negotiation. Obviously, the next couple months are critical because we are going to be in the room negotiating the budget to get to the finish line. And I also think that there are revenue raisers that we can do as well, so that everyone is sort of doing their fair share to make sure that we get to the finish line.
So when you talk about revenue raisers, are we talking new taxes? Are we talking new fees? What are we talking about?
So the council outlined a number of revenue raisers actually on high income earners that were different than what the mayor had proposed, but we think still very, very important. I think the governor's plan on the estate tax is a sensible one, and I support it because that plan in particular is affecting those homeowners who are buying a second home in excess of $5 million. So that's something that we want to focus on as well. And so I'm excited about the plan that the council put out because I think it sort of does both. It uses a number of tools in our toolbox that do call for additional revenue raisers. It also calls for smart investments, and it also calls for savings, which let's face it, we know that we need to do savings as well. And I think we've outlined dozens and dozens of savings that we can realize as a city without cutting services.
What about the mayor's proposal to on the estate tax to limit how much people can pass along in wealth to their heirs?
Well, that one, I do have concerns about the $750,000 because certainly in talking to many of my colleagues who are talking to Black homeowners in particular, who have finally built like generational wealth, that is very, very important.
Or bodega owners or small business owners.
But I've talked to so many Black homeowners who feel that that would devastate the generational wealth that they've built, and we do not want to do that. So I do have concerns about that, and I had concerns, obviously, about raising property taxes. I was very unequivocal on that I am absolutely against raising property taxes 9.5%, because again, I think that will devastate Black and brown communities, as well as renters and small businesses as well.
But will we have to redo the tax system? I mean, everybody says it's really terrible, but nobody has the juice or the desire to change things.
Well, property tax reform is sorely needed. It's something that we
It's really hard to do.
It is hard to do, but it's not impossible to do. And I think that's a real area of opportunity moving forward to make our property tax system more equitable. And so that is something absolutely that I think is possible. Not easy, but certainly possible.
One last question. So there are a lot of people in the police unions that are hoping that you could find a way to increase the number of police, especially since there's such a lot of high-octane events coming up, from the World Cup to the 4th of July celebrations for the 250th anniversary. Does New York City need more police? I
do think we do. I think we've got the same number, actually less police officers right now than we did on 9/11. I mean, which is a shocking statistic given how much the city has grown. I'm someone who's intimately involved in the events after 9/11 in terms of the rebuilding of Lower Manhattan. I spent a decade on that. My business was decimated on 9/11. I chaired the local community board in Lower Manhattan for 7 years during those days. And so we know that the NYPD has successfully thwarted over 50 terrorist attacks to our city. We haven't heard about a lot of them because the NYPD, particularly in the years after 9/11, thwarted them. So I am concerned, and I'm concerned about the attrition of the NYPD, which is between 8.25% and 10%. We have tremendous attrition in the NYPD. That is a concern, and we do have a concern that whether it's rapes or felony assaults, so those numbers are creeping up. So I do want to make sure that the NYPD is properly resourced, and so in the oversight hearing we had on the NYPD, that was actually my first question to the NYPD.
So you would support increasing the size of the
I would, yes. I think, look, I think public safety is very, very important. Every community feels it, and so we do want to make sure that the NYPD has the proper resources that they need.
On that note, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you at home for joining me as well.